All right, I think we're ready. So again, welcome everyone to Email Design and Marketing, a masterclass put on by Braze and Dispatch. Yeah, today we got two great speakers. I'm one of them. Majid, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Matt, and very excited to be here today. Hi, everyone. Majid Khan is my name, and I'm the head evangelist at Brace, meaning I represent our company globally. On a day-to-day basis, I talk to a lot of brands about, what a great customer engagement looks like, how email can help as a channel to create that relevant, personalized customer experiences, depending upon wherever their customers are in the life cycle. And as Matt already mentioned, great to be here today to talk about all things email marketing.
Awesome. And hi, everyone. I'm Matt Harris. I'm the CEO and founder of Dispatch. I'm a longtime email nerd. I used to build email, and then I started building email systems. And now with Dispatch, we partner with companies like Braze to make the email production process a lot easier. Super stoked to be here and talking about email today. It's my bread and butter. So we've got a rough agenda here today for you folks. What we wanted to do today was really tie together trends in marketing and how to do marketing amazingly well in 2023 to the state of email marketing and design. So we're gonna go through marketing trends, modernizing email into email marketing 2023, and then really kind of a bit of the nuts and bolts of 2023 email design, what you can and can't do, and then talk about the latest and greatest technology and what you can leverage today, and then make time for the Q&A. So that, Manchit, I'll pass to you for marketing trends.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic. I would love to, start this conversation by talking about marketing trends. But before that, I would love to introduce Brace on the next slide. For those of you who don't know what Brace is, we are a comprehensive customer engagement platform, and our vision is to help brands like you to create that relevant, memorable customer experiences. So that's what we have been doing for the last 11 years. And, speaking of email as a channel, Matt, every time I talk in an email marketing conference, is the first that actually comes to my mind is I always try and look back at the relationship that I as an individual had with email, right? So when you look back, Matt, right, 15, 20 years ago, every time you wanted to check email, you literally had to sit in front of your computer, right? And that kind of like evolved, right? And then you started to sit in front of laptops, and then, smartphones, smartwatches, tablets, PCs. There has been a regular evolution of devices. And what that tells us is that even if email hasn't changed tremendously, well, we do have AMP for email now, even if emails haven't changed quite tremendously, the way that we consume email has changed, right? It's just not that we used to sit in front of the laptop to access email anymore. We can even ask Siri to read our emails out, right? So that's the kind of evolution that happened because of the evolution of devices. As a brand, we often should think about how can we engage our consumers across all of those devices to create that meaningful customer experiences, and that's what Brace, along with email and other channels, helping brands across the globe to create that meaningful conversation with our customers. And as you see here on the screen, we have over 1,500 employees, and we serve over 1,700 customers across the globe, across different verticals. And on the right-hand side, we see, a few of the brands that we actually work with. Again, that's our vision, to help brands to create meaningful conversation with their customers. And if you could move to the next slide, speaking of email as a channel, how it has evolved, there is no question that email has transformed into an extension of everybody's day-to-day life. The first thing that probably you do waking up could be you could check your personal email or your office email. That's the kind of case for most of the individuals that you come across on a day-to-day basis. But oftentimes, Matt, the problem that I think about, right? Every time you receive a message that is irrelevant from a brand that you engage with, you get pissed off, right? Because in the world today, we would expect brands to understand who we are, and that is really key, right? And that brings me to the point of personalization. And as you see here, what the data tells us is that 90% of the consumers are annoyed when they receive messages that are not personally relevant to them. And every marketer on this call, you would probably feel the same, right? So what is that you can actually do to change that, right? And if you would change that, if you would think about your consumers, and not only it creates great experience for your customers, but also at the same time, you would see a lift in conversion rate, right? As you see here, 31% lift. And then I talked about, the way that we consume email has changed, right? Mobile first. Even though consumers today engage with a lot of different devices, mobile is a key device where they with the click of a button can access the email. So again, the consumption has changed. So 50% of e-commerce transaction takes place on a mobile device, and that is probably true to most of you on the call today too. And then talking about cohesive experiences, right? 72% of the consumers say that a disconnected customer experience is a reason to switch brand. And that is a key thing here, specifically given the macroeconomic downturn. And I say that because we live in a very competitive world. Number one, consumers have too many options to choose from, right? With the blink of an eye, they could move to a brand which is providing greater customer experiences, and they will stick to that brand for a longer period of time. You can have brilliant product, but if you create bad experiences, they will switch. When you talk about, content is king, if you're in the business of streaming, you can have brilliant content, but if you are not creating that experiences, your consumers will move. And then finally, being relevant, right? 67% of the consumers would be more loyal to a brand that demonstrate human connection, right? Obviously, we are all humans at the end of the day. How can you, for example, leverage data to understand how your users have engaged with your brand? So based on that, you can send triggered messaging, for example, right? So be relevant, be personalized, be cohesive, and as and when the devices evolve, be there in that devices for your customers. And on the next slide, speaking of all of these evolution at Braze, we regularly, every year, we come up with customer engagement review. And in this review, we typically focus and ask more than 1,500 VP plus marketing decision makers across 14 global markets. And we ask them, what are the trends that they see will happen every year? And this year, interesting insights came up, right? On the next slide, we will see the first one is due to macroeconomic downturn, right? Brands are focusing on retention, which I think should be important, even if there are no macroeconomic downturn. But given the current scenario, this is pushing brands to focus more on the retention. And then the second point is data management remains a big challenge. When I say it's a big challenge, it's not about collecting data, it's about using the data to create meaningful conversation, and brands are struggling to do that. And we will talk about why. And the final point here is, silo teams are a barrier to progress, and we will look at what that actually means in the upcoming slides. So the first one in the next slide, if you look at the year-over-year data, right? So 2020, 33%, 2021, 41%, and 2022, nearly 50% of the brands that they said, more than half of their marketing budget is actually going to retention, right? And that's a good thing. It's not just about keeping on acquiring new customers, but about what can you do to retain your existing customer and also to build that lifetime value. And spending more than 50% of the budget on retention is a great thing. And obviously, the macroeconomic downturn is fueling that decision to be made across all these companies globally. And 83% of the global companies said their marketing budgets will actually increase in the next 12 months, right? So as a brand, as an audience today, you should be thinking about where your budget is going and what can you do to retain your existing customers. And the next slide, we will talk about the relevancy, right? And this is my favorite part in the deck, right? So beyond retention, brands recognize the value of relevant messaging. So, right, we often talk about batch and blast messaging. And the sad thing is there are still so many brands out there, they actually do that, right? They would send a number of emails on a day-to-day basis without understanding if their consumers are engaging with their email at all, right? Even if consumers engage with their email, they don't think about what is it actually bringing it to the consumers and what is it actually bringing it to the business. Are we improving your business? Are our customers being happy about the messages that we actually said? Given everything that's going on in the world today, the interesting thing is 53% of the consumer brands said they will send messages offering helpful advice, right? So as a brand, you can't be self-serving in every message you send. So think about what can you do to be relevant in the consumer's life cycle. And the last point here is 37% of the brands said will pull back on sending promotional offers. What that actually means is, I had an interesting conversation with the retailer who said, you can't send 20% voucher in every email. hoping that they would convert. It is not sustainable, right? But rather what you can actually do is, depending upon where your consumers are in the life cycle, you can think about what is that relevant, what is it relevant for your consumers, and based on that, you can send the relevant messages. And on the next slide, we talk about data. So when I say data, 80% of the surveyed consumers, they said they're collecting too much data, resulting in information that they can't use effectively. So we don't have a data problem, but we have a problem about, how to actually collect and analyze and then use the data to have meaningful conversations. So think about how you can do all of those, because that still remains a big challenge for a lot of other brands. And then the final point from the trends that I wanted to talk about is that siloed teams are a barrier to progress. I wanted to make 2 points here. Number one, when you think of large companies, when I say large companies, companies with over 2,500 employees, only 28% of the marketers said customer engagement was won by marketing in collaboration with other teams, right? And obviously, Matt, when you look at this slide, you probably think, many people on the audience probably think too, smaller companies, the numbers must be higher. But that's the interesting thing, right? In smaller companies, it's actually even worse, right? Companies with less than 500 employees, just 21% of the marketers actually said customer engagement is won by marketing in teams with other teams. So if you're an audience listening this today, think about what can you do to work together as a team. And again, we will dive more deeper into the use cases and stuff like that later. But now let me hand it over to you, Matt, to continue with the presentation.
Thanks, Majid. I think these are super interesting trends, and believe it or not, I'm going to do my best to tie email design back to all of these. So let's talk about that. So modernizing email for 2023, it's an interesting question. I love the point of the start is that in the last 15 years, like the email technology hasn't changed. How we consume it, what devices we use has changed quite a bit, but the form, the code behind the scenes largely hasn't changed. So we have to get really creative in how we use it. So I wanted to really just touch on this, is that email design today in 2023, we are seeing like people trying to push the envelope of what you can do and how your email can look. The major consideration here is that consumers today have really, really high expectations for your email, especially in consumer first or consumer focused brands. Your customers are expecting more and more from you in every email. The cost of a bad email, broken images, broken links, it gets higher every day. And every single marketing trend report I see calls out that a broken customer experience or bad emails always is attributed to a higher churn rate and people moving to your competitor. One thing I want to call out with some of these designs here, and this are a lot of really interesting things going on. Number one, brands like Canva that are B2B, but with a kind of a consumerization focus on how they did or how to approach that, still have a ton of fun in their email. It's still like extremely colorful. And Canva as a brand is really fun and playful, and they pull that into their email in a really great way. And so I want to just, B2B sometimes kind of gets ignored when we talk about cool email design. And I want to shout out Canva here. They do some amazing work. They're a customer as well, so it's a shameless plug, but they do great stuff. Some of the other interesting things we're seeing in 2023 is people really playing with width of email. There's this awesome email here with design news. Unfortunately, the image here is a little bit low res, but some people, companies have been playing with extremely narrow email widths that, on mobile devices it's kind of like a native resolution, you can call it that. They look really great. They're still quite interesting to consume on a laptop, on a desktop, on a tablet, so that you don't lose information. And I think it puts an interesting constraint on us as email marketers in terms of what content we put into this. Some other callouts are, instead of thinking about dark mode as a secondary in terms of like, oh shoot, we have to do dark mode. Some brands are just going all out on dark mode and just like, well, every email is going to be dark mode, and that kind of helps us future-proof a little bit. There's some constraints there. And then just other examples here, like just great use of color and contrast to make interesting emails that are going to be really engaging. I don't think we wouldn't have seen these 5-6 years ago, or even maybe in the last couple of years. So design trends in general, we're seeing, we always say you have to fall back gracefully. You've always had to design for Outlook and Gmail. But now it's just getting even harder with dark mode. And so I think you have to design your emails at the outset with dark mode in mind. It's kind of one of the takeaways there. We do see a lot of examples of people breaking the grid. So, I mean, if you're in email design, a single column or, the kind of a skyscraper email is probably something you've designed before. We're seeing a lot of successful campaigns breaking that grid somehow horizontally. And you can do that using some new email techniques, and it looks really, really great. And finally, like I don't need to be the only one to tell you this, but adding motion in the way of different GIFs is it's really, really popular. It's definitely producing results. It is expensive from a resource standpoint, and there are tools that can kind of help make that a little easier on you as a marketer. Canva being one of them, they can help you generate GIFs. But the one caveat I'll add with adding motion is that we're not seeing yet a large pickup in using actual full video in email. So we still prefer animations and GIFs in email over full video. And that's mostly actually due to the constraints of what devices can actually use it and leverage it. Digging in a little more, like this is kind of like what we are advising clients on today around how to, what to focus on in email. I'll actually start with the bottom point, but get really bold with typography. I think, there are constraints around using images in email sometimes, but instead of just using splashy or fancy hero images, we're seeing brands, and again, this Black Friday email is a great example. We're seeing brands just leverage interesting typography in really great ways to make really bold emails, and it actually does kind of stand out and kind of puts your message first and in really big text. And I think that's important. And then the other one is trying to experiment where it's safe. And I know this can be challenging, but things like CSS drop shadows or transform, they won't necessarily fall back gracefully to Outlook. So Outlook's not going to look pixel perfect. But in the modern clients and modern mobile phones, you are going to be able to generate like really kind of like next generation looking emails. And I think we're reaching a point where it's kind of safe to start using some of these things. It's not going to necessarily completely break the emails on Outlook. They just won't look exactly the same. And so from a cost benefit perspective, I think it's worth starting to consider some of these trade-offs when you're doing your email design. All right. Yeah, dark mode. We can't talk about email design right now without talking about dark mode. And this webinar, we could do an entire webinar on like the technicals of designing for dark mode. But really there's a couple of key points to focus on. Number one, adding a light background shape behind your logo. There's an example here from Litmus, who do this extremely well, and kind of gives you this kind of a glow effect. And in general, you want to kind of avoid using non-transparent background images in the background of your emails. Yeah, you'd have to be testing. The other big one that catches a lot of brands, and I'll say something in a second, but social icons. So small images, so under 100 pixels, often the social icons could even be a small logo, will be inverted by some email clients, and it just doesn't look really good. And this is where we see brands kind of getting caught with dark mode often. And so think about how you're going to approach that, and try to avoid those really small icons that are going to get flipped by clients. So we've got there's a load more content on the internet about dark mode. Dispatch in particular, we have a couple of really great blog posts that break this down. So happy to share some links on this later. All right, what does it mean to get next generation, and like how do you approach this? So I want to touch on this from two perspectives on the marketing trends that are really important. Number one is the importance of personalization, but really like how do you actually go about it and doing personalization at scale or in a meaningful way. And the other one is that component of collaboration, and why is it so important. So, I mean, from my perspective, using the design system today is really, it's basically a requirement if you're doing email at scale. Design systems for email come with like a lot of really big benefits. Guardrails that are going to help you execute your email faster, as well as test less. And as well, a design system can help you interact with your email from like more from a visual perspective, instead of having to digging into code every single time. But the big reason why I push design systems, and it relates back to personalization, is that without a design system, every time you want to do personalization, you're either trying to copy and paste code from a previous email, which is like fraught with issues, or you're pulling in an email developer or a software developer to go into the email code and try to write the personalization code for you. And I don't, have to tell you the numbers there, but that's really expensive. With the design system, you can start baking in personalization into modules or components that you're using, and those can be reusable across components. And we're seeing design systems now where personalization can be baked in with conditional logic and things like that, and you can still control it as a marketer without knowing how to code. Control that logic when you're building the email, and that's how you do personalization at scale. Is you bake it into your design system, and that's really the answer I've seen that's been really successful. Interactive elements to engage your audience with, AMP or AMP for email is one way you can do this. There's more options, and it really comes down to, I think, your audience. And I'm going to get into this in detail later, but depending on your audience, there's some really interesting new technology you can leverage, and we'll get into it. And then I will talk a little bit about future proofing as well. I think as we talk about consumer expectations being really, really high, and all of us in email competing with everyone else, I think localization is a really interesting question. And one component is in North America in particular, we don't tend to localize email. Now, personally, I'm Canadian, and in Canada, we have French and English. And so we have the worst approach to localization possible, which is most emails in Canada that are localized. All we do is we have an English email and then a French email, and they're attached together. And so every email you see both. And that's a terrible approach for many reasons, like especially French speaking people. The fact that you have to scroll to actually get to content that you want to read is terrible. But also when you're fighting against the file size of emails, that we're trying to include more content, like that halves the content you can include. And then focusing on the United States, we actually have seen some clients take a really targeted approach with Spanish localizations of email. And that can see really, really great results. And so that's why I think in North America, it's worth kind of contemplating and think about localization. The challenge always is it's a really big lift in terms of effort and time and money to do this. Going back to the design system focus, design systems today can help you do this and accomplish this at scale, so that, going from English to English and Spanish isn't necessarily as huge or massive a project as you might think. So I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about email design before I talked about design systems and email production in particular. So give you context on me and where I'm coming from today. I've been literally working on email for 20 years. I have a bit of a baby face, but 20 years ago, I was coding HTML emails and writing software to send them. I built Dispatch to solve some of the same problems I had 20 years ago. Unfortunately, the technology hasn't changed. But we're still dealing with responsive emails. We're still dealing with how do we make emails look good on mobile, and we're dealing with how do we pull in collaborators? How do we pull in engineers to collaborate with marketing, to collaborate with CRM, to collaborate with a localization team? And I built Dispatch to kind of be the home for all of that. We help you build better emails faster, and we help you publish those to platforms like Braze or via an API. We're a smaller company, but we're still really lucky to work with some pretty amazing brands and customers out there. And so it's kind of where we're coming from today. So I'm going to pause there on email design, and we're going to talk in specific about the state of email marketing. Majid.
Yeah, perfect. Matt, thanks for sharing all of those, designs. And, a couple of things that you actually mentioned, as you were speaking, you talked about high expectation, you talked about broken email experiences. You also mentioned personalization towards the last slide. You also talked about the localization. That kind of brings me to the customer experience part. What can you do to create that relevant customer experiences for your customers using email? And when we move to the next slide, we would see, I wanted to showcase a few use cases, right? So before I do that, make every step of the customer journey personal, right? So as a marketer, I always think from my perspective first, what is that I like as an individual when I engage with a brand, right? We talked about, receiving irrelevant messages. How would that affect retaining your customers? How would that affect your consumers, switching to a brand in a blink of an eye, right? So what can you do from the very beginning of the customer onboarding journey? The first thing, obviously, there are different stages, as you see here on the screen: the awareness phase, the consideration, purchase, retention, and loyalty phase, right? So as an user, I would expect the brand to be transparent from the very beginning of the customer onboarding journey, right? The moment a user sign up to your product or services, engage them in using email, because email has always been one of the most important channels from the very beginning of the onboarding journey, right? So in that email, talk about, for example, if you're in the business of fintech, talk about how we're going to protect your users' data and privacy, because that is really, really key. And they're going to give your money, give their money to you, right? So build trust and transparency from the very beginning, right? And then always talk about what is it relevant for them in that moment, from the way that they are engaging with you. I will give you an example. Say that, I'm engaging with the retailer. I go to their site, I browse a pair of jeans, I add it to the cart, and then I abandon the cart. Could be for multiple reasons, right? One of the reasons could be I probably thought at the last moment the price is too high and I don't want to, purchase that. The second reason could be the delivery is going to take longer. So now imagine, as a retailer, the price has come down, and as a brand, you should understand and you should know my behavior on your site. So what can you do to let me know the price has gone down, right? Send me an email saying that, hey, you know what, the product that you have added in the cart has just gone down by price, so why don't you actually go ahead and make a purchase? And that would bring me to the third stage, as you see here, which is the purchasing phase, right? So in this specific scenario, I am saving money, and that is adding value. And as a brand, if you could let me know, I would stick with you longer. That's the fourth phase, right? Retention. You can't just expect your consumers to stick around for a longer period of time if you don't know exactly what they are doing, and if you don't know or don't create that relevant experience for your customers. And then finally, the loyalty pieces. It's a long process, right? I mean, as and when your consumers move through that journey along with you for a longer period of time, how can you be relevant as and when their lifestyle changes, right? And when you talk about loyalty, oftentimes the scenario here is your consumers don't know until or unless you present it to them, right? As and when they reach a specific stage. Imagine if you're in the business of travel and hospitality, if they have traveled 100,000 miles with your airlines, if they have stayed at your hotel for like over 30 days in a period of last 12 months, let them know, hey, you know what, this is what you have achieved with this, and we would like to reward you with so and so redeems, right? Give them choices and options, but more importantly, let them know via email as a channel so that they know, hey, this is what I have and this is what I have achieved with your brand. And that brings me to a few use cases that I would love to talk about in the next couple of slides. So the first is, like I said, facilitate multi-step onboarding with the welcome email series, right? So the initial email should cover the brand basics, right? So oftentimes we talk about communicating brand value. We live in a world today where everybody are talking about sustainability. So imagine if I am someone who believes in sustainability, as a brand, you are already letting me know what you believe in, and consumers tend to stick to a brand who believes in the same purpose that they do believe in. Again, all of this is tying back to the trends that we talked about, retention in a macroeconomic downturn. What can you do with every single message to make it relevant for your audience? And then the second use case here is, driving first purchase event, right? Drive users to make their first purchase with a special offer, right? Oftentimes we see brand, incentivizing, triggering them to make that first move, right? So if you could actually do that in a way that you understand your consumers, right? Do that in a way that you will understand where they are, what is that they actually need. And Matt talked about localization in a way, right? Send them relevant product recommendation. That is actually really, really key. And then the third one, I would like to touch a little bit upon the cross-channel element here. So using email as a channel, talk to them about or encourage them to download the app, because that is also a great way to drive user engagement. And on the next slide, please, using multiple sources of customer data across the lifecycle to asset unmet needs, right? So when you talk about lapsed users, we talked about retention quite a lot now, and at the same time, you also need to understand why your users are churning, right? So you need to engage your users with incentives and understand why they are churning, right? One great example here is, I would like to sum it up, which is ask your consumers directly what they like and what they don't like, right? Because your consumers can give it to you, right? Send an email, for example, if you have seen a consumer has gone through that freemium phase for the first 7 days. And if they haven't become a premium member, for example, if you're in the business of streaming, ask them why they haven't actually moved to the next phase, right? If they have purchased a product from you, send email and ask them, hey, would you like to rate our product, right? If they have made the decision to not come back, ask them what is that you can actually do to make them come back, right? Incentivizing is always not the option, but at the same time, there are so many consumers, they would actually come back to your brand to give feedback what they like and what they don't like. But the interesting thing here is to do that, you need to understand which stage of the life cycle that they are in so that you can send that relevant message. And on the next slide, please, we will talk about cross-channel coordination, right? So I talked about the retailer, abandoning the cart. So here, what you're seeing on the screen is on the left-hand side, an email prompt for an immediate feedback. Like I talked about, I go to that retailer and I make that purchase, and that could be the moment for me to, staying fresh about the product, or at least the moment that I have received the product, send an email saying, how would you like that product? And the second one is, again, we are bringing in the cross-channel element here, check-in via push notification. So consumers today, they don't have too much time in their hand. The attention span is getting lower and lower. And obviously, if they are not engaging via email, there could be a possibility you can, if you have already received the opt-in for push notification, you can send a push notification and say, hey, you know what, we see that you haven't engaged with our email, would you like to rate our product? And the third option could be also like, send in an in-app message, because when the user decided to open the app, which means they have decided to engage with you directly, so use that as an opportunity to engage your consumers in a meaningful way. And that brings me to a couple of case studies from the brands that we actually worked with. So the first one is Grubhub, right? Matt talked about localization. So what Grubhub had did as the online restaurant order and the delivery app, they wanted to have an engaging, personalized email campaign to build awareness and drive usage, right? So you have the history of engagement, right? So let's say, Matt loves Grubhub and then, keeps on ordering over a period of the last 12 years, but Matt keeps a track of, everything that he had ordered, right? But Grubhub knows everything that Matt had done using via their app, right? The number of restaurants that they have, Matt had ordered, the number of meals Matt had ordered, right? How frequently Matt had ordered burger, for example, right? I mean, you can nail down into the details, right? To a point where Grubhub knows in a way that, Matt likes burger more than pizza, right? And then sending a relevant personalized recommendation at the end saying, hey, you know what, this is what you have done with us and we would like to let you know. And that definitely would increase the engagement rate. And this is a use case study from Grubhub, but this can be applicable for all of the other industries too, right? Imagine if you're in the business of music and streaming, all of those songs that you have listened to, travel, all of those travel that you have done with a specific brand. So personalize it, localize it, using email as a channel. And that is a great way to bring your users back and also retain them for a longer period of time. And in the next case study, I would love to touch a bit upon for email. We talked about email as a channel. The devices have been evolving, but at the same time, we have AMP for email now. We see a lot of our clients are trying to get their hands on AMP for email, right? So the way that we consume email has changed, but also at the same time, email can be a channel which can be interactive, providing more information to the users in the palm of their hand. So Babylon, being a healthcare tech company here in the UK, so they provide that provides patients with virtual consultations with doctors. They were looking for an innovative way to prompt healthcare. When you think of healthcare, it's not always an exciting thing that consumers would engage on, right? It's not very similar like a QSR where you would regularly go and engage with those specific brands. But for healthcare, they needed an innovative way for their consumers to engage. So by leveraging Brace and also a few of the partners that we have worked with, they created AMP for email, which effectively drove users to the app, right? So one click of a button, they were able to pinpoint their users to different parts of the body in the email where they could actually touch and get more information, and then they will be directed to their app. Obviously, this interactive piece has brought better results for their company, 56% more click-through rates, and also drove a 20% increase in people completing health check. And I believe, Matt, this is one of the most innovative ways that company like Babylon has done to encourage people to use a healthcare check. Imagine, not being innovative and sending just a plain simple message or a plain simple email. That wouldn't probably encourage them to do the health check, but this definitely has done so. So with that, let me hand it over back to you, Matt.
Thanks, Majid. I want to call out Grubhub. Actually, I used to live in San Francisco, and didn't rain fairly often, so I wouldn't quite dress for it. And I think one day in the early spring, we had a random torrential downpour, and I was stuck in my office. And at 11:35 or something, I got an email in my inbox from Grubhub being they're like, "It's raining in San Francisco. Today's the best day to order a sandwich." And I was like, "Heck yeah!" And that to me still is the best email campaign I've ever seen, because that level of personalization and timing and targeting was just on point. So big shout out to Grubhub. All right, let's talk ABCs of email design and kind of dig into it. We're going to get a little bit technical. If you're not technical, I apologize. If you are technical, I apologize as well, because it's not going to be that technical. All right. We talked about this. HTML email is still not super great. So I'm going to go over a couple, we'll call them lowlights of HTML email really quick. Some of these are new techniques we're seeing people pop up. Some of these are kind of just things you need to know. So from a new technique standpoint, we're starting to see people use tables, HTML tables, to build email today. And that's a fact that we can't move away from. If you're not doing this yet, though, we are seeing using divs to wrap around tables in really interesting ways to create gutters around their designs, which look great, as well as to do background colors through the tables that works in across multiple devices. So that's something you can read up on in our blog and use that in interesting ways. For those newer to email, and this is probably when we talk about broken emails or mismatched expectations from design to email, one of the biggest problems, you can't copy and paste your website into an email. Really, you have to respect that this is a 20-year-old or more, way more. I've worked on it for 20 years. This is a very old format that literally hasn't changed, and it's not the same as HTML for websites. It's come a long way, but it really it's its own different format, and you kind of have to treat it that way, unfortunately. One of the other kind of gotchas is that most email builders are really only great with static HTML. So when you talk about adding personalization, conditional logic, and things like that, it really breaks down quickly, and you have to jump into code. And this is an unfortunate fact of email today, is that to do the cool things often requires code. Now, this is better and better software every day to make this better, but you really have to look for it. The next fact about email, and the fact that it's kind of not so great, is you do need to allow time for rigorous Q&A and testing. And a couple of things to highlight here is, if you're leveraging personalization, really emphasize your testing components to make sure that works. Literally some of the worst, some of the most common, broken emails we see are when the email starts hello, and then it's $ first name. And that just, it looks awful to the customer. It doesn't feel great when you send that. And you can test for that very easily. Platforms like Braze do have a great ways to test this. So I would definitely focus on that. Next thing in QA, messaging looks good. What does this mean? Okay, we're working with a form factor email that might be read on many different screen sizes. And so there's a lot of different concepts here. There's an idea of widow words and other things. The idea here is make sure your message still looks good when it's read without images. Make sure your message still looks great when it's on a 4K ultra display. Try to think about how your messaging is going to read on almost different screen sizes. Again, some of the really worst emails I receive, and sometimes when we have images turned off and alt tags and other things aren't set up correctly, an email is unreadable without images off, and that's something to consider and think about. And kind of on that same point, just think about it a lot, making sure that your message gets across on the different screen sizes. The final call out, and this is in the realm of getting experimental with CSS. Those new CSS techniques that we use on websites well, we used to widgets for quite a while now, but to do rounded edges on tables. And you can see this is an example here on the right of a button we've actually built out in Dispatch for one of our clients. And it looks great. Even small rounding on edges of buttons and borders adds like a really nice, like kind of like stylish touch to email. And we're okay starting to do some of these techniques because it falls back gracefully now, or we can make sure that it falls back gracefully to Outlook and other clients. And so that's one of the things that I think is like, hey, this email is still not great, but we can start changing things. And again, just kind of like in general constraints on HTML email. Number one is size. As more and more retailers are pushing to have more content in every single email and more deals and more images, truncation of email is becoming more and more of an issue. There is a hard size limit on emails you can send, Gmail in particular and other clients, and it's not necessarily uniform. So you really have to think about this and have this part of your QA process. Length is another challenge. And I think it's really worth considering. How many people here today send an email and think about like the kind of what's below the fold on mobile? Below the fold is kind of, we're familiar with that concept from websites of like, hey, we load a website and what's below the fold, what's going to appear on the screen initially when the website loads. But do you think about that for mobile as well? Is your most important information above the fold on mobile? I think it's an important consideration is the length and the attention span that your readers have. And then finally, accessibility. There's some specific constraints on mobile. Like I think the way our team talks about it is like on mobile, buttons are easy to press, but text links, those are just going to get fat fingered. And so really think about your call to actions and how you're using them on desktop email and on mobile email, because that's going to impact your conversion rate quite a bit. So kind of responsive email, what you do here. We do still generally recommend 600 pixel width emails. Again, I mentioned at the outset with design trends, some people are doing narrower and wider email, but generally 600 pixels gives you the best result. Be really mindful of that content below the fold. We do believe in designing for accessibility. And so there's certain things you do, like accessibility can mean a lot of different things in email today, but make sure you have alt text on your images so that screen readers can read your emails is one thing. Use buttons from mobile instead of text links because they're really hard. And then information hierarchy, I think, is really important as well. Like have your most important information, at the top or above the fold so that people can get to it right quickly. And then prioritize your most important information. There's some really good examples, and actually I saw this in Magic, one of your slides, but let's talk about Net Promoter Score as an example. You probably send Net Promoter Score emails today, and on desktop, it's 1 from 10 left to right. But when you want that on mobile, you don't want 1 at the top of the list going down to 10 at the bottom of the email, because then the customer has to scroll. And so you actually invert that, and you have 10 at the top and go down to 1. And that's a really important technique. Number one, you'll get more people clicking on the top buttons. But just think about in general of like, what do you want people interacting with your email, and where do you want them going to email, and make sure that's kind of on the top on mobile. All right, so just a few minutes here. Let's talk about the latest and greatest in email, and a couple examples here of some of the games actually that we built with Dispatch. But it's not just about interactive email or AMP for email. Let's talk about Outlook. So Outlook is incredibly popular. It's the 3rd most popular email client in the world, especially in the business context. Outlook's really popular, but about just over 4% global market share. And what I'll say about Outlook, and I'll say the same about Gmail and iPhone, all the others, is like, just like you need to understand your audience when you put together your messaging and your marketing and your brand guidelines, you do need to think about your audience with regard to how are they opening and interacting with email. And what I mean by that is we interact with some customers who 100% of their client base is on Outlook, which means, it means certain things, like there are certain techniques that only work in Outlook, so they can focus on those. And so on top of that, Microsoft is actually investing heavily in new technologies. And so if your customer base is in Outlook, and you can see that through open analytics, what devices are being used, you could potentially invest in some of these. So let's take a look. So Microsoft actually has a technology called actionable messages and adaptive cards. And this allows you to do things like like quick approve and decline and see the status of those requests in email, which is really exciting. And then adaptive cards let you include information like flight information, real-time tracking of orders, and things like that. And it's pretty cool technology. It's a little bit specific in how they do it. But if you're sending to an Outlook audience, this is technology you can leverage to make your emails way more engaging or way more personalized and give them like a really nice flair. And I include some links here at the bottom of the next couple slides if you're interested in this. The downside of this is that it's still Microsoft and it's still Outlook and it's kind of gnarly. So this is the two things I just showed, actionable messages and adaptive card support, and which clients actually support it from the Microsoft Office offering. And so, yeah, I'm sorry, like this is a bit to parse and there's a whole bunch of caveats here. And so like, again, like if your audience is, 100% Office and Office 365 and whatever, like this is potentially really worthwhile looking at, but it's still a bit of a minefield on the Microsoft side. All right, let's talk about Gmail. It is still king, in my opinion, in terms of moving email forward. I'm very grateful for that. We're going to talk about 4 different things you can do in Gmail that could potentially be a really big lift for you. So the first up is inbox actions. There's 2 kind of major ways to use inbox actions. They've got what they call one-click actions, which are things like, save something or confirm or even add to cart. These are actions where the user can click at one time right in their inbox. This works on desktop and mobile, and then that'll save on your website or in your app, and then they don't have to do it again. Check in for a flight, add to queue is a really great example of that. Then Gmail also has what are called go-to actions. Go-to actions are going to pop the user out of email and take them somewhere else. And so this is the example of like check in for a flight. You click that, and then it'll either open the airline's mobile website, or open the mobile app. Again, know your audience. If your audience is on Gmail today, inbox actions are 100% worthwhile taking a look at. These are extremely powerful and see really great engagement. The next up are Gmail highlights. These let you create kind of like a highlight of a really important content that's in your email, things like reservations, orders, and invoices. These are not being leveraged as much anymore, but they're still a worthwhile technology to look at. And the reason these aren't being used as much is because Gmail added annotations. And so if y'all remember a couple of years ago, Gmail added the promotions tab and all of us got really unhappy. So Gmail's trying to help us out. They're trying to help the consumer out as well. So what are email annotations? Email annotations let you include product carousels and deal information in an incredibly visually appealing way. You can see an example here on the right. And this shows up in the inbox. Now, the big caveat is it only shows in the promotions tab. But the benefit here is Gmail's trying to make the promotions tab a much more interesting and interactive experience for the consumer. Instead of scrolling subject lines about deals, they get to see pictures of your products and kind of consume that information in like a feed-like way. It's incredibly powerful. The merchants that are signing up for this are seeing really, really great results. And I highly recommend email annotations as a technology to review. Now, the caveat with all the ones I just talked about is like they require a developer to get started. You can use a design system like Dispatch to bake this into every email send. But they do require some development work to kind of get started and make it all work. But highly recommend email annotations for you show deals as well as just general product catalogs with no deal. Finally, let's talk about AMP for email. This is in some markets reaching maturity. The big caveat with AMP for email is it's a whole new form factor to email, meaning it's a whole new code you have to write, which is pretty heavy lift. It's also only available on certain clients, Gmail, Yahoo, and AOL, most notable, which means, to be frank, in North America, there's not many merchants using Gmail today. I go back to know your audience. If your audience is predominantly on Gmail, this is worth consideration. I will say in non-North American markets, Gmail is just popping off, or not Gmail, sorry, AMP for email is popping off. The best description I can give you, you can make email now as an extension of your store or your app or your overall customer experience. And there's so many use cases for this that we've been doing with customers. Dispatch, the way we approach AMP for email is we make AMP modules that you can just drag and drop in your email and you can use. Every email we build, the Dispatch is an AMP email as well. So it's a really great experience. There's one use case I want to call out for AMP for email that's really exciting. And that's actually SMS capture. So we're seeing some interesting AMP-based emails where the only AMP component really is, hey, enter your phone number and sign up and you'll get a 10% discount. And the benefit here for many merchants is you only have your email address and you can only send email, and that really limits you. I'm a big believer in actually sending less email and using multi-channel. SMS capture and email using AMP means that you now have a second channel you can message that customer with, which is like basically invaluable. So trying to wrap this up in the interest of time here. Sorry, folks. But I would really say, hey, for 2023, how to do email in an amazing way. Really prioritize production. It's the only way you can really leverage any of these modern elements at scale. And I think really pre-building modules with dynamic personalization is a way to do that at scale as well. And then helps you reduce QA time and increase collaboration. We've done this with customers like Corbett, 99% faster email curation, 80% time less on troubleshooting, and 75% less time spent on QA. Like, if that doesn't sound like a good time to you, I don't know. Anyways, we'll pause there. We're gonna jump into Q&A.
Yeah, we do have like a few questions already coming in, Matt. So probably we could take that. I did see the first one. You probably see it too. Like, been hearing that AMP has no traction in North America. Thoughts? You did mention that.
Yeah, I did just touch on this, but yeah, I think it all comes down to the email clients, right? And so if your customers are on Gmail and you're in North America, this is a technology worth investing in. If your customers are predominantly not opening on Gmail, then this is less exciting for you. And in North America, iPhone is king, and so it makes this really challenging.
Yep. And then the next question is dark mode question. An agency told our company that we should be sending image-based emails in brackets block of images / text to avoid dark mode messing with our designs. I see a lot of brands sending image-based emails like this. What's your opinion on this?
Yeah, it's a good question. The short answer is that using images only is kind of like a cheat for dark mode. I actually highly don't recommend it. You can achieve almost the same thing using more advanced coding techniques. And I think it's worthwhile. You can then have more options in the email. We are like, as email marketers, I think we all know now that image heavy or image only emails are actually not a good thing. From an accessibility standpoint as well, if you're using images only to avoid dark mode, you're basically out, pushing out any customer using a screen reader. And finally, if someone's using dark mode and you're forcing like white emails, like white backgrounds, you've just pissed them off because now their screen's like blaring in their face when they're expecting dark mode. So I don't recommend it, but yes, you can do that.
Yeah. And then there are like two more questions, please feel free to keep the questions coming in. We can probably bundle these two questions in one. So what do you think is the best strategy for B2B marketing, and how can we utilize this information? And the other question is like, any advice or tips for B2B communication? So kind of the same.
Yeah, Majid, I don't know if you have any thoughts around here, but I would definitely point to Canva as like a shining light example here. Like, just because we're in the B2B space, and I'm B2B as well, doesn't mean we can't use some of the same approaches that consumer marketers use. So like, number one, obviously you always have to think about your brand voice and how that translates into email, but be colorful, be playful, and try out different things. Try out sending from the company persona, try out sending from a brand mascot or something else. I think it's like, there's a lot of options in there. I would really recommend as well, like, personalization can be really utilized in B2B as well. One of the best B2B things to do ever is use product metrics and like product activity, and use that in email to show the value you're creating. So like, Dispatch, we help people produce emails really, really fast. So we can say, hey, you created 100 new email campaigns this month, in Dispatch, and you did it in, 30 minutes. That's crazy. Like, let's celebrate that. So again, think about it from the consumer perspective for B2B. That's my top tip.
Yeah, same thoughts from my two, Matt. I think from the consumer side, you mentioned value. Again, everybody who opens that email, whether it's B2B or B2C, are like humans. So think about how are you being relevant. So again, you need to understand where they are in the customer life cycle, even for B2B. And then there is one comment, which is, okay, one of the very best presentations that I have ever attended, high value content and competent, passionate presenters who know their topic and aren't just transparently shilling for business. Amazing. Thanks for that feedback. Really appreciate it. And the next question is, any advice with recruitment marketing emails, Matt?
Yeah. It depends on what side of the market. Like if you're emailing applicants or emailing the business themselves, I'm assuming if you're going to email the applicants, one of the biggest things there I've seen, there's a company based out in New York called Ladders, which does recruitment business and heavily into email marketing. Personalization is the biggest thing. If you're a job seeker and a job doesn't seem like one you'd actually want to apply for, like you're not going to click on that email. It's just like job postings. You need to incredibly tailor job postings and job descriptions to the applicants, and that's the big thing with recruitment emails as well. Is like really highlight why this role would be great for this person. And that's my biggest piece of advice. I think Zillow does an amazing job with apartment listing emails and housing listing emails. And like, you might think that's nothing like job seeking, but I think it's actually incredibly the same. Recruitment is often you're acting as like a search portal and sending emails to people about searches that match their requirements. It's the same for apartments and houses as it is for jobs. And so think about making them visually appealing and making them really personal and applicable to the recipient.
And specifically for recruitment marketing emails, if the question is around sending the emails to the applicants, be very, very relevant, please, because it's a very stressful thing to do when they're in a job search, and if they have a specific preferences of what they are looking for, just send them how that is like relevant for them, right? Otherwise you are just wasting somebody else's time. So please be relevant. And also you can take the beautiful thing about recruitment marketing emails, and even if this is applicable for other industries, is that from the very beginning of the journey, ask for preferences, what they're like, what kind of jobs they are looking for, what is their salary preferences, and if every criteria matches, then send the messages to them.
Yeah, then I just want to one thing to jump on that, and this relates to B2B emails as well, is that if you have account managers attached to your accounts, or if you have like a support team that's working with someone in the recruiting world, if you're sending recruitment emails and you have a specific recruiter these people might be attached to or working with, like include that information in almost every email send, like personalized with, hey, Matt, like you're a valued customer, and this here is Dylan, who is your account manager. Reach out to him if you have a specific question. Then you can do that in your marketing emails and still add like a very personal flair to a business email. And it falls for recruitment as well.
Yeah. And Matt, how about we take one more question? We are on time, on the dot. Maybe just one more.
Okay, sure.
Okay.
I'm happy to.
Okay, perfect. So do you lean towards longer content filled emails or shorter emails closer to a social media post style?
The terrible answer is I think you should test both and see what resonates most with your audience. And then like probably mix and matching overall is like a really great thing.
Yeah, A/B testing, and do that for even for subject lines too, because you just don't know what resonates and what doesn't. If somebody tells you an email A is going to definitely work, they are lying, because nobody knows what's working, right? Test and test and test, experiment. And the beautiful thing is, even we see that with successful brands, larger brands, even when their campaigns are successful, they keep on testing and experiment. So build that culture inside the team, give them the leverage to go and openly test it, and then have the right tools to do so too. That is very, very important. Okay, should we take one more, please?
Let's do it. Okay.
Okay.
I'm having fun.
Are there industries that should trend one way or the other? Follow up to previous question. So I don't know which previous question that was. Probably it's towards B2B then. Are there industries? Yeah, could be, right?
Yeah.
Do you lean toward? Yeah, probably the
Oh, this is regarding to length of email messages.
Yes. Yeah.
What
So
do you think?
again, test it. right? So that's
Yeah.
that's going to be the answer. So again, it really depends on the industries too. So for example, if you are in a fintech industry and you are sending something very, very important, you don't want to be short. Give them all the information that they actually need. Again, if it is an email that you are sending just when they signed up, right, give them all the information because they are giving their money to you, they are trusting you, right? And if it is about something fun, if it is about some offer, right, try and give them the right amount of information that you can actually try and convert them. Anything to add?
Yeah, I would say one of my biggest pet peeves around email design in general is having emails that they don't look anything like the rest of your customer experience. And I'll shout out Airbnb here. Back in the day when Airbnb didn't have a mobile app because mobile apps weren't a thing, Airbnb emails looked like their website. They had the same menu and the same header, and you could literally go from email to website to email and not know you were leaving the Airbnb website. And I think this stands true for this as well. Megan, who's asking this question, sorry. Like if you're an app first business and you're predominantly, your entire customer experience is on an app on that screen, I would start with short emails as well that look like my app and feel like my app, because that's what your customers are used to and that's what they're going to be used to engaging. If you're a B2B brand where people are logging into your SaaS portal, I would lean more towards having my emails look like my SaaS portal. They don't have to have the exact same look and feel, and like even at Dispatch we don't. But that's kind of how I would approach branding and email design in general. Make it feel like your customer experience is extended in email, and give it that same priority is kind of my take.
Fantastic. We are definitely over time, so I absolutely enjoyed speaking today, Matt. This is fantastic.
This is a good time, Majid. I really enjoyed it. I hope the audience had a good time as well. Some really great questions. So thank you all. I guess we'll call it there. Thank you so much for joining us. We will be sending out a recording afterwards. I think we'll try doing a recap blog post on the Dispatch side as well. Majid, really enjoyed speaking with you today, and I hope we can do this again sometime. Yeah, fantastic. And thank you all again, from my side too, thank you for taking the time to join us today. Absolutely looking forward to more of this in the future. And thank you, Matt, again. Thanks, everyone. Cheers. Bye-bye.